Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to the start of another video. Today I'm going to be doing a wrap-up of my 2023 r/fantasy bingo card. So the new bingo card, for anybody who doesn't know, comes out on April 1st every year. So just in the past week or so, the new bingo card for 2024 has dropped. And I am going to do like a TBR/hopeful video for that new bingo card, but to be honest, I just haven't really figured out what I'm putting on that one yet. So for the time being, I would like to wrap up my 2023 bingo card and let you know what I read. I did finish the card, but I wasn't necessarily going for hard mode on all of the squares, so I don't remember. We're gonna go through them together and I'm gonna let you know what I read for every single square. And so when I go through it, I will tell you whether it was hard mode or not. Because I just know while I was filling it out, I was like, screw it. We're not doing that. Because filling it out is really what I want to do. So the very first card on the square on the card was title with a title, which basically means that the title of the book has some kind of title of a person in it. And the hard mode for this was that it is not a title of royalty. So the book that I used for this was The Hexologist by Josiah Bancroft, because in the book, the hexologists are like the job title of the couple that we follow, and they are like magical investigators, and they are called the hexologists. So this one does fit for hard mode, which is awesome. And then the second square on this card was superheroes, focused on superpowered individuals, but I actually replaced this square because for the life of me, I could not think of a superhero book to read. However, I did replace this with the name in the title from the 2022 square, which means that the character's name is in the title of the book, and the hard mode for this is that it's the character's full name. So this was both a replacement and my only reread for the card, because the book that I used for this was The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch, which of course does fit for hard mode since the full name of Loch Lamora is in that title. The third square is bottom of the TBR, which is reading one of the books that's been on your TBR pile for the longest. And there actually was no hard mode for this because, as they say, actually finishing a book you've been putting off for so long is already hard enough, and ain't that the truth? So the one that I used for this is Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky, because I bought this book like 2.5 years ago, fully intending to read it right away, and I just never did. So it wasn't the book that had been on my physical TBR the longest, but it's definitely up there, like for books that I bought back in that era. It's one of the only ones that has not gotten read to this point, or at least maybe not one of the only ones, but it is one of the oldest ones for sure. The fourth square is magical realism, and the only stipulation for hard mode was that it was not on the list that they had attached in their post. And so I'm not sure what exactly what the focus of that list was, aside from it obviously being magical realism, but it had some of the most famous ones on it, like 100 Years of Solitude and things like that. And the book that I chose for this was Bunny by Mona Awad, which was not on that list, which I honestly hadn't even checked that list. I'm only just discovering now. So Bunny does fit for hard mode, so that is always nice. The fifth square across the top is young adult, and the only hard mode for this one was that it has to have been published in the last 5 years. So I chose Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, which is published in the last 5 years, and so that means that I officially have at least one bingo across the top for hard mode, which is awesome. Because like I said, I did fill out the entire square, but I wasn't sure how many of them were actually gonna hit hard mode, so it's a good start. And it's nice to have that to hold on to, because the first square in the second row is mundane jobs, and this basically means that a character has a normal job. Like, it's not a fantasy job title, it's just a normal job. However, the hard mode is that this does not take place on Earth. And the book that I chose for this was The X-Hex by Aaron Sterling, because even though our character is a witch and the storylines in the book revolve around magic, the main character is actually just a professor at a university. So normal job. However, it takes place in like Georgia or North Carolina or something like that. I forget where. So it's it's on Earth, you know what I mean? Now the next square is also, I believe, not hitting hard mode for me because it is published in the 2000s. And so the book that I put down for this is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie, and I'm just going to double check the hard mode. So yeah, the hard mode is that it's not in the top 30 of r/Fantasy's Best of 2023 list, and The First Law by Joe Abercrombie, like that entire world as a whole, is a mainstay on the top 30 of that list, so it doesn't fit. However, it, I believe, is literally the only book that I read that entire year that was published in the 2000s. Like, that's not even a joke, because like I was still reading The Realm of the Elderlings, but the books that I was reading, not to mention that I couldn't use Robin Hobb because I already used her for another square, but the books that I was reading by that time, I believe, were actually all past the 2000s already. Maybe not The Rainwilds, but like I said, I already used. But then Robin Hobb is also going to be on the top 30. So I think the moral of the story is that I'm just not very aware of like not popular like 2000s fantasy books, and they're just not on my TBR at this point. Now the next square is Angels and Demons, and so for this one I used The Memory of Souls by Jen Lyons, which is one of the Chorus of Dragons books, and this is so funny because it was Sky from Discord that reminded me that this series even has Angels and Demons. Like, I struggled for so long out of the year to find out what I was, or to figure out like what I would put for this square, and then one day Sky's just like, well, yeah, like Chorus of Dragons has demons, and in my head I'm like, well, oh my god, no, duh, like it's a main plot point and one of our main characters is a demon, so like, yeah, this fits for hard mode. It just makes me laugh at myself that sometimes I get so fixated on certain things about a book that even if I have read them, you would have to remind me. Like, if I've read a book and you told me like, oh yeah, that does have this in it, it would take me a minute to be like, oh my god, yeah, you're right, it does. Like, and I didn't forget or anything, it's just that it completely glosses over it in my brain. So I don't really know what that's about, but anyway, the next square on the card, which is a mainstay, at least in the years that I've been doing the r/Fantasy bingo, is the 5 short stories square. And so the like normal mode for this is literally just any 5 short stories. The hard mode is that you read an entire anthology or collection. And so for this, I have Never Whistle at Night, the dark indigenous fiction anthology, and I read the whole thing in March, so I do qualify for hard mode for that square. And the next square is horror, and the only hard mode for this was that it was not Stephen King or H.P. Lovecraft, so that's honestly a really easy hard mode if you ask me. But I guess they do have a lot of options between them, but like, you know, there's a lot of other options too. Like, horror is an entire genre. It would be like having a square that's just fantasy, and then you're like, well, it can't be Brandon Sanderson. And then you've got it, like, there can't be a person out there that's like, well, dang, I can't think of a single other book. Like, just makes me laugh. However, the book that I picked that very easily fits hard mode was The Hacienda by Isabel Cañas. I read and adored The Hacienda last year. And it is horror, but it also has like a romance plot, and it was very enjoyable. So I loved that book. I honestly almost want to reread it. The next square up, actually we're moving down another row. So on that second row, I obviously didn't hit hard mode for all 5 of them, but 3 out of 5 is not too bad. Now the next row starts with our self-pub or indie pub square, and originally I had The 13th Hour by Trudy Skies on here, and I didn't really care that it didn't fit for hard mode because I didn't think that I was going to have a ton of other opportunities to put a self-pub book down. However, then I joined Mel's takeover of reading the Spiffbone 9 finalists, and so now at this point I realized that the hard mode is less than 100 ratings on Goodreads, and both The Last Fang of God by Ryan Kirk and Master of the Void by Wendraven have less than 100 ratings on Goodreads. So I could put either one of the, let's just call it Master of the Void, because why not? So that one has like 70 ratings right now, which is honestly shocking to me. For some reason, I had this perception in my head that that book was more popular than it is, maybe because I enjoyed it quite a bit. But yeah, Master of the Void shockingly still has less than 100 ratings on Goodreads, so that absolutely fits for hard mode for this. Next up, we have the Set in the Middle East square, which is pretty self-explanatory, and the hard mode for this is that the author is also of Middle Eastern heritage. And so I have The Kingdom of Copper down by S.A. Chakraborty. I could have chosen any of the Daevabad trilogy, but I just personally preferred, like, Kingdom of Copper was my favorite book of the three, so I just put that one down. However, this does not fit hard mode because, as far as I know, like, Shannon Chakraborty does not actually have Middle Eastern heritage. Maybe somebody can correct me on that, but like whenever I Google her, it just says she's American and born in Queens, which like doesn't really tell me anything, but also tells me more on the side of like, well, she's American, so I don't know. But regardless, like, it fits for the square. I'm just not entirely sure whether it fits for hard mode. I feel like it probably doesn't. And then our next square is published in 2023, and the hard mode for this is that it's also a debut novel. Now, I haven't actually had a look to see whether I've read anything else that was published in 2023 that could potentially be a debut. The book that I did have down for this was Blade of Dream by Daniel Abraham, which is absolutely not his debut. I've read, like, that's the 6th book by him that I've read. 7 if you count like Leviathan Wakes and the James S.A. Corey stuff. However, I'm just gonna have a quick look at my Goodreads to see if any of the 2023 pub books were a debut. Okay, this is actually an interesting one because it appears that The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz was a debut in 2023. However, I am not entirely sure. I feel like it rides that line between speculative and like thriller. Although I do think that it could fall on the speculative side of things because of certain aspects of the book, like one particular storyline that is impacting our main character. But I think there's a question of whether or not that's like a mental thing or whether it's actually speculative. So I mean, maybe I'll put The Writing Retreat on there and say that it does count for hard mode because I do feel like you could argue that that is speculative fiction. Then the next square on the card is Multiverses, and for this I put down This Is How You Lose the Time War by oh my gosh, I was gonna completely mix their names together. Max El-Motar. No, we have Max Gladstone and Amal El-Motar. And This Is How You Lose the Time War is very interesting when it comes to the take on the multiverse because we're jumping through time and space to different places. Like, definitely I feel like it is multiverses, but it's a different like way and a different version, and it's not really clear how they travel, and it's just a very interesting and whimsical book. So it definitely counts, but the hard mode is that they don't walk through a literal door to get to the other like multiverse, so it definitely fits for that. Then next up we have the Person of Color author square, which is a square that is on the card every year, but they've said that they're just going to change the hard mode for it every year. So for last year, the hard mode was that it takes place in a like sci-fi futuristic setting. So the book that I put down for this was The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez, and I don't think that I could argue that this counts for hard mode. There are some strange things about the like current timeline, and it's very story within a story, but I feel like the bulk of the time we spend in the main timelines are in a more classically minded fantasy setting, so I don't really think that this counts because I don't think that we get enough of like the main timeline to really get a grasp on whether it's like futuristic or sci-fi. It feels a little bit dystopian, but it's hard to say. So I don't think that one counts for hard mode, but I think that that means that we got only 2 out of the 5 on this row for hard mode, which is maybe 2.5, because Spear Cuts Through Water kind of could be, if you will allow me to have that. The first square in the 4th row is a book club or read-along selection, and so this is one that I honestly will never hit the hard mode for because the hard mode is to actually read it and actively participate with the Reddit like book club at the time when they're reading, and it's just that like normally I wouldn't line up my schedule like that on purpose to read a book with them, so I will just settle for reading a book that is on their book club list that has been read in the past. And so this year that was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. Like I said, not hard mode, it was just on their list, and it was a book that I had also happened to read, and I adored it, and there it is. Now, the next square up is a novella, and I actually forget what the hard mode is for this. Oh, the novella is not published by Tor.com Publishing. So the novella that I read was The Willful Princess and the Piebald Prince, and this is Harper Voyager, so this fits for hard mode. I really didn't have to take it off the shelf to figure that out, but so be it. Next up, we have Mythical Beasts, and then the hard mode for this is that it's no dragons or dragon-like creatures. And so for this, I chose The Deep by River Solomon because the mythical creature that we deal with in here, I think they're called like the Wajanru. I forget at this point after reading it like 3.5 months ago, but they are the mermaid-like creatures that form the society that we're exploring. So they fit. They're not dragons, so it fits for hard mode, which is awesome. Next up, we have elemental magic, meaning that the magic in the world deals with the elements, the primary magic system. And the hard mode for this was just that it was not V.E. Schwab's Shades of Magic or Jim Butcher's Codex Alera series. So for this one, I put down The Counselor by E.J. Beaton because this is, for right now, a standalone, although I dearly hope for the announcement of a sequel. But in this world, there is a magic system that definitely does surround the 4 elements, and then there's sort of like a mystical 5th ability that you can have that has to do with the mind. But the whole idea, or a main idea of this setting, is that the people who have elemental magic, or the people that have magic, have been oppressed and have been like downtrodden for a long time, and that is a central theme of the story. Next up, we have myths and retellings, and the hard mode for this is that it is not Greek or Roman. And so for this, I put down The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu because this, I forget which like dynasty or period in history this is analogous to, but this retells basically the broad strokes of some wars, and it also deals with like some gods and some mythology of China. Next up is a queer norm setting, and the hard mode for this is just that it doesn't take place in an explicitly futuristic timeline and not like with sci-fi elements. It's basically that it takes place in maybe an undetermined time that's like in the past or similar to us. And so the book that I have down for this is Labyrinth's Heart by M.A. Carrick, which is the finale to the Rook and Rose trilogy. One of my most anticipated books of last year, and a book that I ended up loving. But this whole series is very much queer norm setting, and it really has no like defining timeline anchor. Like it does have some elements of like magic and society that would lead you to believe that it's a little bit more modern, but it also has like a nobility structure that is a little bit more archaic, and so it mixes things together, but it's definitely not futuristic. Next up, we have a coastal or island setting, and this is a story that features a major setting that is near or surrounded by the sea, and the hard mode is that this also features seafaring. So this one was actually pretty easy for me because this, I chose the first book in the Tide Child trilogy by R.J. Barker, which is The Bone Ships. And the reason this was so easy is because I actually read this in April of last year, like very shortly after the card came out, and as soon as I read it, I realized that it fit perfectly in this square because not only are the like land masses in the setting like islands, but also a major part of the story actually happens on these bone ships on the sea. So it was absolutely perfect for this, for hard mode as well. Next up, and our third last square on the board, is Druids. And so this is a book that heavily features druids, can be a classic druid, a priest, or a magician in Celtic lore, or a magic user whose powers stem from nature. And the hard mode for this was just that it's not the Iron Druid Chronicles. So once again, kind of an easy hard mode, but then on the other hand, this one was a little bit more difficult, I thought, to find a book for until after I had read it, because I feel like it's more difficult to know like whether a book features nature magic or whether it features a druid unless it's really obvious. But in the end, I ended up putting down The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri for this one, because after reading it, and I did see it in a couple of recommendation threads, I just realized and agreed that like the nature magic and like the fact that the magic stems so strongly from nature really fits for this one, and it fits for hard mode, which is awesome. Okay, next up, the square is called Featuring Robots, and so that is pretty self-explanatory, but the hard mode for this one is that the main character is a robot. And for a long time, I thought that this is the square I was going to have to replace, because as someone who is not a big sci-fi reader, I was pretty convinced that I was not going to read a book that featured robots. However, I ended up reading The Fall Is All There Is by C.M. Kaplan for the SPIFBO 9 finalists, and while the main character is not a robot, there are some like cyborg horses and some other things of that nature that are very robotic in this world. And so it does fit the square, and lucky for me, because I was able to replace the heroes and villains square, because for a while I really was not sure what I was going to do. I did not think I was going to finish the bingo card, which would be an absolute heartbreak and a travesty for me. And then the final square on the bingo card is called Sequel, and that is simply to read a book that is a sequel. And the hard mode is that it is book 3 or further in a series, and so I have read a book like that is book 3 or more in a series this year, but just based on like the authors that I've used and like the places that other things had to slot in, I didn't end up being able to hit hard mode for this one, because the book that I ended up choosing is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas, which is a book that I very much enjoyed. I was really happy to see how that one went for me, but of course it is only the second book in the series, so it doesn't fit for hard mode, but that's okay. And I still didn't even count, like if you counted, let me know how many hard modes I hit down in the comments, but that was my 2023 bingo card. Honestly, I feel like it went pretty well, especially given the fact that my plans always go off the rails, and then I end up having to backfill. Like instead of reading the books that I have set out for myself, I end up going back and trying to fit what I did read into the squares. So let me know also if you're someone who does that as well, and then we can languish together in our chaos. But yeah, that is everything that I read for the r/fantasy 2023 bingo challenge. And like I mentioned, I'm gonna have a video like for my 2024 plans and some recommendations coming as well. But yeah, I'm gonna have to do that once I actually figure out what my 2024 card is gonna look like, which I have not done as of yet. But yeah, that is it for this one. Please like if you liked it. Let me know down in the comments what you think. Subscribe if you'd like to see more from me. And as always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!